This episode is our first focusing on Australia, the land down under, and as an American who came of age in the 80s, it is so hard to resist working Crocodile Dundee into this intro. But I resisted. I was gonna do an Australian accent on the knife. That's not a knife. That's a knife. Scene from Crocodile Dundee. But I feared I might somehow offend everybody with an Australian accent by my attempt at it's not a podcast. And maybe just offend all Australians. And given that after the first episode with Sam Brown, where our podcast shot up to the top 75 in, I believe it was business podcasts in New Zealand, I really don't want to alienate the Australians, because with today's episode, with Rosie, Chong, and Tasleem, Ahmad, Fateh, I think we've got a shot at cracking the top 100 of some list in Australia as well. These are two fantastic creators on LinkedIn, people I've been following for months now. They were both gracious enough to talk to me. And my interest in having the two of them on was, Rosie's at 33,000 or so in her LinkedIn adventure. And she's doing this as let's say a younger millennial. So somebody whose generation is, only in the last few years getting out of university and entering the workforce and starting to spend more time on LinkedIn. Rosie is an amazing example of somebody in her mid-20s who is just killing it out there. And then Taz is another guy who has just come out of nowhere, and just in the last 6 months or so shot up to 45,000 followers. They both make their living on content creation and strategy to some degree. Rosie talks a little bit in this podcast about her 9 to 5 as a social media strategist. She's got her own podcast called It's a Definite Maybe. She's leaning into TikTok hard and has a sizable following there as well. While Taz just released his Robinhood course, it's an extremely meaty free course. It's an amazing thing that he's done there. And we get into what he's doing there. I was hoping that this was the exclusive. Taz was saying this is his third podcast this week. Although maybe we'll be the first one to get out the door. We could make a run at that, given the quick turnaround time that I tend to shoot for. Before we dive in, this is episode 10. And with this episode, we're going to pass 1,000 plays or downloads on this podcast so far. It's not a huge number, but to me, it's a really significant number. And I've talked about this a little bit a few episodes ago. Of like, this is my fourth podcast attempt. And the second one I'm doing now, where I've got unrationed with a couple buddies that we're loving doing, and we're going to be doing ad infinitum. But I really appreciate the kind words and the support that I'm getting in the direct messages on LinkedIn and in people's comments to the posts about the podcast, and on the Apple reviews. Here's a really lovely review from a guy named Christian, who's out of North Carolina in the US, saying, I've been a member of LinkedIn since 2004, but never made much use of it. It was a place online to post my resume, not much more. Times have changed. What used to be a dry, buttoned-up professional desert has morphed into a diverse, dynamic, humanistic oasis where people post about their passions and engage one another in a very real, synergistic way. Tony taps into this burgeoning community with candor and grace, hosting thoughtful combinations of various fellow LinkedIn members and letting the conversations run. I found each podcast both informative and inspiring. Highly recommend the series. Christian, thank you for that. That's really generous and gracious of you. And I agree. I also recommend the entire series. Here's one from someone named Ant Carlton from a few weeks ago. As a serious creator on LinkedIn, this is one of my favorite pods to learn from so I can grow my online business. Tony's doing big things. It's worth checking out. And that review was titled Best LinkedIn Podcast Out There. I really appreciate that as well. And it's as a creative, you know, and somebody who's been sharing thoughts and writing in public for 7 or 8 years, I've not experienced the engagement before the last year, maybe more like 10 or 11 months as I have here on LinkedIn. And it's been life-changing for me. And a huge reason why this podcast exists is I believe that more and more people are going to come online to this platform, that the and I'm not a coder and tech is not my strong suit, but it seems like this platform has the foundational pieces in place where it can sustain growth and traffic in a way that it won't devolve immediately into the sort of cesspool that we're seeing other platforms become. That more people coming online and leveraging this platform will mean more people whose lives are changed for the better, the way that this platform has impacted me. So thank you so much for that. If you are one of the 7.5 billion people who have yet to rate or review this podcast, I really don't do many direct asks, but here's my direct ask. Doing that is really helpful, apparently, for more people finding the podcast. So, but if it would be a 1-star review, personally, I don't think people need that opinion. You know, I think maybe that's an opinion you should keep to yourself. And if I'm being really honest, I think it might mean there's some work for you to do on yourself. What is it about you that makes me suck so bad? All right. One other note before we dive in with Rosie and Taz. This is the first episode where I am experimenting with ad content. And I just told you how many podcast plays or listens this podcast has. And I can tell you that it is super early to be to be thinking about monetization at all. But as with most things in life, I'm going to do this my own weird way. And here's what I'm playing with as my idea for this. Workshop in the name, but the name at the moment is Hustle Corner. And it's going to be clearly delineated as ad content. I'm going to plop them down in the middle of the episodes. And instead of your typical sponsorship or ad read, not that I'm opposed to those things, but frankly, there's a dance with the girl that brought you dynamic. And I've got this idea for a way to do this that I think is frankly a faster path to going from $0 to $1 of revenue that this podcast is generating. Seth Godin has a line about how it's a lot harder to go from 0 to 1 than it is from 1 to 1,000. I'm going to be inviting people to join me for a 4-minute, 44-second conversation about who they are and what they do. It's going to be specific to people I'm in touch with on LinkedIn. I think this is going to be for people who are using LinkedIn as a primary channel for selling, and who would just be interested in cutting it up with me for a shade under 5 minutes. It's not going to be a, hey, give me your elevator pitch in a direct way, and then I tell you why I think that's so interesting. We're going to make it a little more, a little wilder than that. It's going to be a little more unpredictable. But my goal is with each person who does that with me, that people come away knowing, liking, and trusting you more, and having a better sense of what it is you do and how they might be able to learn more about what you do and what you have to offer. Today's the first one where we're experimenting with that. I have so graciously donated a chunk of time to a man who is going to be on an episode of LinkyLand himself, Christopher Sellers. He just released his first book last week. Christopher's book is titled Applied Creativity. And I wanted to have Christopher on, well, in his thing. So he calls himself Christopher, but then he says, only my mother calls me Christopher. So he wants to be called Chris, but then it's that thing where if you're responding in a comment and you want to like tag him, then you can only tag as not just Christopher, but he has it as Christopher period. I mean, it's a problem, man. It's a problem. Why just be Chris? Just be Chris if you want me to call you Chris. Unless your target for your LinkedIn profile is your mother, the only person who thinks of you as Christopher. Anyway, I digress. Two reasons. Number one, Chris and I have been talking about this book for really a year now, and I'm thrilled to see it in the world. He's recording the audiobook maybe as we speak. I'm excited to get that between my ears. And secondly, I described Chris as my first troll on LinkedIn, where this was back, I want to say in November of 2021. I put out a definition of creativity and said, this is what I'm working with as my working definition. And he came in and picked it apart a little bit in a way that made it better for sure. And so I went and made it better. And I was like, hey, what do you think about this? And they picked it apart some more. And we had this really rich exchange on how we think about creativity as a practice, as a discipline, as a tool. And he was instrumental to the platform opening up to me in a new way, where it's like, oh, okay, this is really interesting. It's not just job announcements. It's not just talking about the subject matter or what you do for a living. You can, in a targeted way, find people who care about the things you care about and then get into it with them. And so Chris has a special place in my heart. And of course, on this episode, he is also Australian, so we've got a LinkyLand down under. How was that? Was that offensive? Because I hope not. I bring it with nothing but love. I wish I had an accent. I think that's when I'm like trying to do the accents. I like doing accents because I wish I had a better one than I do. I have like that Midwestern sort of nondescript weatherman vibe. Like that's actually how I talk, and people will bring up how I have kind of a Southern accent. And look, it's just you and me here. It's not entirely real. Like I've come to talk with a little bit more of a, I come from St. Louis. I come from like the like line between the southern United States and the rest of the country. And so I know a lot of people who talk with more of an accent. And I've just sort of, I think, you know what? This podcast isn't about me and accents. This podcast is about Australians and listening to them get into what they care about with their accents. So let's just leave it and get after it. Here's a conversation with Rosie Chong and Tasleem, Ahmad, Fateh.
So I'll just say off the bat, if because I love going on tangents, and then when I start talking about it, my mind just starts going into it. So please just cut me off. Feel free to do that. I'm not going to mind any of that because I don't stop talking sometimes.
Okay. Well, I too have never met a rabbit hole I did not insist on jumping down. So we may very well just end up on a 45-minute tangent, and that turns into the entire show.
I look forward to it. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Rosie, Taz, thank you for joining me on the podcast. And I've done a little intro for the two of you before we start here, but Rosie, we were just talking before we got on about how, so this is the first time you and I have spoken. This is the first time Taz and I have spoken. And it is actually the first time that the two of you, two shining stars of the Australian LinkedIn scene, have crossed paths. So I'm thrilled to be able to facilitate that connection in real Zoom. And let's just start. We've got a lot of ground we'll cover here over the next hour, but let's just start with who you are, where you're coming from, and since this is a podcast about LinkedIn, what is it you care about, or what is it you focus on, your why, if you will, for the stuff you do on LinkedIn?
Sure. So, I mean, we already know I'm Rosie. Hello. I work a 9 to 5, which does surprise a lot of people. I work my Monday to Friday as a social strategist in agency land. I work at a creative agency here in Melbourne, so that keeps me out of trouble. And then obviously a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn. I mean, that's why we're here. I won't go into that yet. I run my own podcast called It's a Definite Maybe with one of my best friends from uni, Stella. And I create content, more traditional sort of content creation, I guess more fashion sort of stuff on TikTok, just, because doing LinkedIn and a podcast and a 9 to 5 was not enough.
And Taz, how about you?
So I'm not that interesting. I basically am an ex-corporate employee, kind of got sick of the entire toxic environment, got out, wanted to start a business, started a bubble tea business, which didn't really work out because of COVID. And then I did a lot of introspection and figured out that my forte is analysis. And so I just sat, and I always had a passion for LinkedIn, and I was just sitting there and analyzing profiles after profiles. And basically made my wife and all my friends and everyone super sick of it. And so they're like, listen, can you stop doing our head in about this and just go tell it to the people who care? And so then I started doing that, and somehow there's a few people that care, and it's interesting. Yeah.
45,000 people that care, dude. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's hard to comprehend for me, to be honest.
It's a fascinating number of people. And frankly, I'm fascinated by both of you, and it's part of why we connected about having this conversation together, where well, frankly, both of you seem like you've just been shot out of goddamn rockets there on the other side of the world. And I find that really interesting. Like how that happens is I mean, Taz, so well, let's take a step back before we go down the rabbit hole. So my own experience, I had a dozen years as an attorney, got out of the law, hadn't paid attention to LinkedIn throughout my legal career. I had no interest in it whatsoever. And it's only been really the last year that I've been creating anything. And really since January that I got into it. And it wasn't until then that the platform started to open up. And, I started having more chats, ended up making friends, finding clients, starting new businesses. I mean, it's been absolutely life-changing in a way that it's almost absurd to me, how impactful it's been. So that's the story. I look for people who who that story resonates with, and it seems like the two of you may be along those lines. So I'd love to hear kind of that, like before and after aspect to your stories as it pertains to this illustrious platform.
How's your up? I can see
So-
that grin on your face.
That was one of the most surprising parts for me as well, because I actually never went on there to try and make friends. But what happens is, because there's such a large pool of people, you eventually end up meeting people that think in a lot of similar ways, and then they support the same values and, you know, have the same passions. And so again, same as you, accidentally ended up making a lot of friends. And then now, you know, we chat on WhatsApp, and we've got all these people in there that can always be so resourceful and help and always there to support. So it was a super big surprise, because it was also sort of around COVID time, or just post COVID time for me, when I started posting and stuff. And so there wasn't really much social activity in real life. So I was going to probably make a post about this as well, saying that, you know, LinkedIn is just more than leads and likes and views, because it's also sort of like, you know, the place where you go and talk to people that you care about. Like, I was just talking to a friend earlier today, and like me and him, we talk about spirituality, and like all of the we actually have calls where we don't talk about business at all, and like me and him do the same thing, but we were like, no, let's just talk about other things. So it was amazing, because I never expected any of that to happen, but good bonus.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned having this period of like analyzing what was going on out here before you started posting. So, and your posting consistency only came about in 2022, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been on the platform for, I think, maybe about 3 years, because I was a corporate professional. I signed up to be, you know, one of those guys in a suit and have that title there and act like, oh, okay, all right, this is baller life, but it really wasn't. And so I was trying to act smarter than I was, because that's how I thought that you would succeed in corporate, which is true for 95% of corporate. Perception is very important. And so then I was posting, but the consistency wasn't there, because I wasn't posting about things I care about. I wasn't being me. And when you're not being yourself, it takes a lot of effort to put something out, because you have to put 6 masks on before you say something. And so, and the audience can resonate with that. Like we think that they can't, but they can. And so there was no actual LinkedIn effort that I was doing. So I did start in about April.
When
Yeah.
did you
Wow.
leave corporate?
Yeah, so I left corporate about 2 years ago, did
Okay.
a tea business in the middle,
Yeah.
and then that finished about March this year. And so a couple of months after that is when I went ham on LinkedIn.
So as of March of this year, had you had this aha moment about LinkedIn where you could see the potential of the thing?
I always saw the potential. I just never put the effort in. I was on there because I saw the potential from 3 years ago. Obviously saw a different bit of a potential, because I thought it could maybe help me get a promotion, get some corporate clients for the business that we had at that time. But I actually went in terms of working LinkedIn for LinkedIn this year.
Right on. Yeah, and when
Yeah.
I say the potential, what I'm referring to specifically is the one, not the one that where you're on the beaten track, where you're trying to do what every other headshot, you know, corporate headshot with the background is trying to do. I'm talking about the one where all of a sudden you have 45,000 followers and you are
Yeah.
LinkedIn's Robin Hood. That's the potential that I'm particularly interested in. So that's so fascinating. We're gonna unpack that. And I actually had a couple people who, more than any other guest so far, and this is going to be episode 10 or 11. When they heard you were coming on, they were like, "Ask him this," and it's almost like, how
Yeah.
how is he doing what he's doing in a way that's
Oh, there's a science.
Fantastic.
I can. If you have a couple hours, I'll break it down. I don't even want to
No,
charge anyone any money because I can't shut up about it.
I love that, and we are going to talk about that a little bit. Rosie, how about you? What has your LinkedIn trajectory looks like?
I feel like I'm like the boring old first edition toy that sits on the shelf. You get all these shiny new people that come in and are growing like so fast and doing things like Taz that just explode in every post, have so much value, launch like the most iconic free course I've ever seen. And I'm just like, hi, hello. So I every day I feel like an imposter, and I feel like I'm not the only one that feels that way. But my journey with LinkedIn, I guess, was a little bit more forced and intentional, but not in a bad way. I embraced it because I loved it, but I did it because of my job. I was working a sales role I started in Feb 2021. And my boss at the time, Lisa Tay, she was quite big, or still is quite big. She got like 45,000 followers as well. Really big on LinkedIn. Serial entrepreneur, serial businesswoman. And I was like, oh, I'm hooked on. I love what she's about. She was like, you should start LinkedIn. We need it for clients. It'll be good for work. And, I can tell that you're a budding, female powerhouse. I think it'll be good for you. And I was like, okay. And I saw that the platform wasn't filled with many Aussies. It wasn't filled with many women as well. It was filled with a lot of older Caucasian males, or at least just males in general. I was like, I'm here to make some noise and make some chaos. And so I started, and I hustled. I hustled so hard. I was maxing out my connections every week. I was doing it to get clients. I was posting a lot of content that was tied directly to my job. And it was good for a little bit. And I continued with it because I loved it. But when I finished up my job at the end of 2021, I still had only like 7K followers, which is a lot. But in comparison to now, it feels small, which is weird to say.
How many did you have when you started using the platform more in February or March or whatever?
Oh, around 1,000, maybe 800.
Okay,
Because I'd been on the
cool.
platform like here and there with internships and graduating uni and such. Sort of just, part of the thing to do in high school and uni. And then I had this like weird revelation sort of at last Christmas break. So end of 2021, start of 2022. I took a break from the platform. I'd grown to hate it. I was burnt out. I was so done. I hated sales. And I was like, can I keep doing LinkedIn, but can I do it in a way that wasn't with a commercial end goal? Can I do it in a way that feels more like a personal public diary and less like I'm trying to chase clients? And so I did that. And I think that's when I had my big moment of, I guess, growth. And I hit 10K, and then I had a few posts go viral, and then I hit 20K, and then the growth slowed, and I, realized how little importance a follower never has, and that didn't mean anything, still doesn't. But I found a bit of a groove and momentum with my community. I made, like you guys have both said, made some incredible friends. I've had incredible opportunities, and I found such a burning passion, like uncontrollable passion for just wanting to create and write and share with others. And a lot of that stems from my childhood being first gen Asian Australian. Like, I'm not the only person that's gone through being bullied and being different and feeling like an outsider. And I just had always had this sort of intention or purpose to just want to make an impact. And I found I could do that through LinkedIn. And now I do it, and I'm very fortunate to have a very passionate and engaged community that I do get to share my story and my voice and inspire that next gen. And it's not at the moment commercially driven, which is kind of nice.
That is interesting. And it's funny to hear you, Rosie, say, I'm not growing like some other people are growing. Like, given your own truly fantastic growth.
Thank you.
But and that speaks to the nature of the game, doesn't it? That social media is going to give you a bottomless, not a pit, let's say an endless sea of lovely people to connect with and see. And that comparison is really challenging. But so Rosie, you're also into TikTok in a big way, as you're saying. And do you pay a lot of attention to Instagram at this point?
Yes and no. Instagram was one of the first social media platforms I had. And up until probably the last 6 to 12 months, I used it purely for social. I love posting photos. I love sharing stories. I just love social media. I think it's kind of why I ended up in a career in social media. So it's not until like the last 6 to 12 months, I've looked at it as a monetary platform, a way to get brand deals, a way to kind of spread my personal branding and LinkedIn platform. And I think something that is not necessarily best practice and something that not a lot of other business owners or creators that are big on LinkedIn do is my Instagram doesn't really necessarily tie fully to my LinkedIn. It's not, Rosie Chong LinkedIn or like Rosie Chong personal branding. It's the Rosie Chong that I created in year 11 or year 10, whenever Instagram came out. And it's just, like all of my public platforms, it is my diary for the internet to look at because I can't be bothered with filters or editing or anything fake. So I love Instagram, but I totally do not treat it as intensely as like a full-time influencer would.
Right on. What you just mentioned there about the Rosie Chong you came up with in year 11 is really interesting. We're going to unpack that because I am interested in hearing the two of you talk about how you think about branding, and it's like you're both very intentional, I think, and so I'm interested in unpacking that. But I do want to the numbers you've amassed. So part of my interest in having the two of you on is I have been so amazed to discover that LinkedIn has these little corners, these little pockets, sort of the way Twitter does, right? Like you've got sales LinkedIn, and you've got like female entrepreneur LinkedIn, and you've got like it can get really specific, to your point, Taz, where you can find like-minded people who are interested in the same stuff you care about. And then I'm also interested about the geographic diversity on the platform, where I'm like wondering whether and there are people all over the world who are blowing up, this year, right? It seems like it's a year of explosive growth on this platform. But I'm interested in your take on what role being in Australia is having, if any, on what you're doing, and if you have any sense, and maybe you have no sense of that. I know it's hard to read the label from inside the bottle, but I was hoping you could shed some light for me on like, is LinkedIn in Australia different than it is over here in, I'm an American living in Canada. Do you have any sense of that?
LinkedIn doesn't really exist in Australia. It's so interesting seeing every single big UK creator get invited to the head office. They have the creator program, the accelerator program. They have creator managers. And then I sit here in Australia, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Taz or any other Aussie creators, but I'm like, hello, we exist. Have you seen us? And it's really interesting. It feels like LinkedIn Australia is 10 years behind LinkedIn in the UK or America. And I don't think it quite acknowledges or accepts the value creators have in Australia. Like I would say most of my audience are UK or US based. And sure, that has to do with the size of the country and the population. But when I tell people I do LinkedIn Australia, I get a lot of odd looks, and they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah, hey, at least you've spoken to LinkedIn. They've never spoken to me, ever said anything. They act like I don't exist. I try to troll them, get their attention. They don't care. I've even like publicly said all the time, I wish I could get a couple of those white hoodies, and no one cared.
No one wants
Then
to give us hoodies.
Yeah, no.
I'll give you
I just want one.
I'll
Please.
send you hoodies. Yeah.
Thank you. It'll take 14 years to get here because we live so far away.
Yeah. We do live in the past, even though our actual time's in the future. I even made a post actually trolling a creator manager that looks after a lot of my British friends. I forgot his name. I think it was Ash Turner. And so I made a post.
Creator manager. I didn't realize that. I see his name pop up all the time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I actually made a post where I was standing in front of the LinkedIn office like all the people do, and I had a big bobblehead. And I wrote it in a way saying, because I wanted to put a satirical touch on how when people go there, they get a big head. And I
Oh,
actually
that's so
named the
funny.
people, like the CEO and, the creator. I named the creator Mash Turner instead of Ash Turner.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And then he commented on it, but thing is, no one from Australia cares.
They just don't have the infrastructure. Like they don't have, from my understanding, they don't really
don't
have
give
like a department of it. Like
you're just being nice. You're giving them the benefit of doubt that they might not have the budget or the infrastructure. I think it's just Australians. Like we're very lazy with this stuff. We're not like the British and the Americans. We take it very slow. Yeah.
I know, I'm pretty sure like the Australian TikTok Creator Fund didn't start until well after the Creator Fund was available in like Europe, the UK, America. Like we're literally the forgotten cousin.
Yeah. Hey, I don't even have the ability to pin comments. Okay. So I'm
Still,
like no, I don't. I can't even pin a comment. And the problem with me is when I can't find my own comment after I comment, and then
because
it's
you get
just
so many
gone.
comments.
Yeah. So we live in the past, and then there's people talking about we can schedule posts. Man, I
We
can
don't have
barely
that.
post a post. Yeah, exactly. So we feel
I've
very
never
left
scheduled a
out.
post in my life on that platform. I'm always on it. It's like my most used app, but I don't turn on my screen time intentionally because I do not need to be told by my phone, you're spending 14 hours a day on your phone. I'm like, yeah, I work in social media. Leave me alone.
Yeah, I know. It feels bad.
Oh, it's bad. I don't need that judgment.
Okay, so Australia is a forgotten land as far as
Everything.
Yeah.
Well, but so at the same time, and tell you what, I'll give Reid Hoffman a call. I'll see if I can get something for us. Obviously, I'm not on their radar either, but that makes more sense being over here at my pedestrian level. But I guess my follow up on that is my sense is that you've taken advantage of the fact that LinkedIn is behind in Australia, right? That like when you're looking at the way people think about LinkedIn in Australia, it may be like what I'm leveraging with Contender. I just started this little agency that's going to help law firms leverage the platform more effectively. And when I look at that industry in the United States and Canada, I mean, the whole industry is clueless. There are very few people who have any understanding whatsoever of how to take an idea, turn it into a post that can spread. And so I'm looking at it as is like lawyer LinkedIn 3 years behind like sales LinkedIn in a way that they're gonna catch up. And when they do, I'd like to be there to catch that wave. Do you see that sort of, so two-part meandering question, and Taz, I promised you that there would be these. Does your being sort of out there on this island continent, do you see that as being sort of a part of your success and growth? And then also, do you see yourselves as almost like front runners of what is to come in Australia, where everybody else is going to come join you down the road?
Either that or we're going to look really stupid in a while. So I don't think there's any advantage to being in Australia. I actually think
I would agree with that.
I think there's quite a few disadvantages. The
It's
first
a challenge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The first reason I'd say that is because, well, the posting time is very odd. Just the simple.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Chaos.
So, the posting time is a bit odd. That's the first problem. But more than that, we're all competing at a global level. It's we're not trying to get attention isn't segmented on LinkedIn. So if I could be paying attention to an Australian creator or an American or a British and vice versa, which means now everyone's competing for everyone's attention. And sure, it's segmented not geographically, but maybe through other means, but at least geographically it's not. So people that are going to talk about, for example, personal branding, which is my space, I'm going to be in a space where I'm talking to everyone everywhere all the time. So
Well,
no advantage.
Can I zero in on that? So
Mm.
I would push back a little bit from my own perspective on that idea that there is no geographic concentration, where, you know, most of my posts, I can tend to predict before things like really and maybe this speaks to just how far the two of you have your posts go. But you know, that like the cities where the most people are seeing my stuff tends to be fairly consistent in American cities. Does it look like that for you? Like on your posts, are your top cities ever Australian cities, or are they also New York, LA, Mumbai? Like, what does that look like on yours?
So for me, basically, the way I understand this is that you are going to probably have the same cities again and again. And it's not because of any geographical reason, but it's because certain industry markets are concentrated in certain geographical places. So an example of that is that personal branding is something, or LinkedIn personal branding is something that's loudest in a few countries. So UK, for example, and then after UK, you might go to the US, or maybe US and then UK, but it might not be that loud in, for example, Poland. And so if I'm in that niche, or if I'm, I don't like that word, but if I'm in that niche, I will automatically, as my reach grows, it will grow in proportion to where my market is for that niche. It doesn't, the geographical input is irrelevant in this sense, because again, the post has no, you know, travel time. It goes everywhere all the time at the same time. So maybe for lawyers, you might have a higher reach in Singapore because there's maybe a lot of lawyers there, and they might benefit from someone in the US and UK. So it's niche specific. If you maybe purely call center IT, you might get a lot of South Asian, Indian countries. Like that's just where the people are.
My hunch is that your experience of that is very different from almost everybody else's, dude.
What do they say? I don't know.
What, Rosie, what's your, is your experience like what he's described? Because I feel like, Rosie, your network is, at least your foundation, it sounds like those first 5,000 were heavily concentrated in Australia, in a way that then as you've gone from 5,000 to 10,000 to 33,000, you've gone worldwide, no doubt. But like, what's your take on what Taz is unpacking there?
So I'd never heard of it as someone explain it in a way that it's niche specific, but that makes a lot of sense. And I will back the fact that a post doesn't get necessarily as driven by the algorithm. I can't pronounce these words this late at night. By the algorithm, similar to like, unlike TikTok does. TikTok, I get a lot of posts from Melbourne because the app knows I'm in Melbourne. And I think the platform and the main feed is just driven by the profiles you interact with the most and the kind of content you interact with the most. The people I see showing up at the top are the people I message, the people whose profile I check out, the people who I'm going back and forth with in comments. That does not matter what city, country, time zone they're in. So that's how I see the algorithm is developed. In terms of my audience, you're very right. My first sort of 5 to 10K was heavily driven by people in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, people in Australia in general, because the clients I was trying to get were based in Melbourne and Sydney for the work I was doing. But when I started elevating to that next global stage of content and audience, I found most of my audience are people who are in personal branding. They're the people I'm connect with. I have a lot of common ground with sort of marketing and personal branding. And it extends quite nicely to what Taz is saying, is that a lot of them, and they're in the UK because it's such a big market there. A lot of them are in India or Southeast Asia because digital and personal branding and marketing are really big there. Same thing with the US. That's where majority of my comments, where my audience come from these days. There are definitely the same consistent people that show up from Australia, but I think I'm at a space now, at a level now, where the reason my results look the same post after post is because it's the same people showing up. So it's no longer necessarily about what country or city they're in. It's about, oh, I've got a familiar and loyal and trusted community that they just keep coming back for more. And that's why, in the last 6 months, it's probably looking pretty repetitive in terms of city location, because it's no longer about a post that I'm just starting out with. It's cool. I've had the same people come along for this crazy ride with me since day dot or whenever they joined along. And I think that's almost like made my results a little bit biased to that certain question, I suppose, of is it geographically determined?
Yeah. Right on. That makes a lot of sense. Mr. Sellers, thank you for joining me here on, we're calling it Hustle Corner, but that's a working title, and I'm not sure whether the name is stupid and sucks. But thank you for joining me to talk about your book, Applied Creativity.
Thanks for having me, buddy.
So you and I have peacefully and joyfully occupied a very similar corner of the internet over the last year, where we talk about the importance of creativity. I released a book on the topic 3 months ago. You decided you needed to try to be like me.
I think it was, you knew I was writing a book, and then you thought, to spite me, like 2 months prior, you'll get yours out there just to prove that, yeah, so you got there first. But first doesn't always mean better.
No, that's true. That's true. And I did write a spite book. So there's
Let's write a spite book. The Art of War, which I haven't read, spite book. Yeah.
So that's my book on creativity. I just came up with the idea for mine really like in April or May of this year, and I know
Amazing.
You started working on yours. This was like a beginning of COVID. You started working on it, yeah?
Yeah, it was 2 years. Had to write it twice. I wrote it first. I wrote the first version in COVID season 1. So in solo, in lockdown, like a maniac, madman, hermit, created, like we all do, so furiously writing my manifesto. And then after submitting it to a publisher who recommended that I take it to a book coach, took it to a book coach. And the book coach took one look at it and said, "This isn't a book. You're gonna have to start from scratch."
It's a manifesto.
It was a bit of a manifesto. It was heated, let's say, but she was right. She was absolutely right. And like my background is screenwriting, playwriting, and that sort of thing. But like playwright doesn't equate to thought leadership book. Like 2 very different formats. So I had to learn the rules. So go back, learn the rules of how to structure a thought leadership book, spend a second year rewriting said book. So we'll call the first one research. You're right. And then, after about 12 months of proper structure and refining and editing, finally have a finished version to go out into the world, even though you beat me to it within 6 months.
And so give me the Cliff Notes version of what applied creativity does for us.
Sure. So it answers a couple of questions. It's like, if there's a demand for creativity, as discussed with Forbes and LinkedIn, CNBC, and sort of all the powers that be, a lot of research, a lot of papers on this. So if there's demand for creative thinking and creative skills in terms of innovation and complex problem solving, a demand implies a deficit. So how did we get here? Like, what is this demand? And it's a bit of a paradox, because we're the most well-schooled, well-educated, intelligent generations that have ever lived. And we live in a time where information is immediately accessible, it's abundant, and it's free. So this demand for creativity doesn't quite make sense if we have all of this schooling and information. So there's obviously something missing. So the case that I make is our definition and scope of creativity is really rather limited if we examine it purely through innovation and problem solving, which is kind of what STEM does. It's like, this is what it's for: new tools and systems and process. On the other hand, you've got all the creatives, you've got the artists who believe, well, like I'm creative and I'm special and I feel it. And well, sure, but you still need craft and you still need skill. There's no such thing as a born dancer or actor, the same as there's no such thing as a born mechanic or surgeon or accountant, right? You need to learn the craft. So the book is applied creativity is this bridge between the STEM folk and the artistic folk. Go, look, you're actually using 6 creative skills. Like you use them in accounting and engineering and acting and singing and architecture. The skills are universal. The outcomes are unique to your craft. So that's the case that I make, that if there's demand for creativity, what is it? And then how can we practically apply it to what we do? Yeah. So and so hopefully through that you can identify the skills that you already have. And I think that's a big one, because a lot of people swear they're not creative because they're not artistic. It's like, well, you don't need to be an illustrator. Like you might enjoy solving problems. You might enjoy composing or designing things that are aesthetic or more innovative or easy to function. Those are creative skills that you employ. So when it becomes a conscious tool that's applied rather than just something that happens by fluke or inspiration, that's when it becomes really, really powerful, like anything. Like if you consciously use it with intent, and you can turn it on and off when you need it. Like, so the analogy I give is creativity is more like a language you can learn. Everyone speaks a little, but fluency requires knowledge and discipline and craft, and of course, people like yourself to practice with.
Fantastic. And
it's a long cliff note. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfect. And I've had the good fortune to see a couple chapters of the book. I think it's great. I think your 6 skill sets are totally on point, and I think this book it's going to help some people with it. So, thank you for helping make the first shot at this thing work. You're a gentleman and a scholar.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me on to talk about the work. And thanks for also leaving a review. That was great.
I want to touch on how the two of you think about content creation. You both make a lot of stuff. Rosie, you've got a podcast of your own where you're doing weekly episodes. You're creating substantially on 2 different platforms, in addition to having a real job. And
a lot.
Yeah. And Taz, obviously you just had the new course dropping. Yeah. Well, I'm interested to hear how you come to pardon. The process of creation. It's something I've written a lot about. I put my first book out a couple months ago now. It's called In the Creative Arena. And it's just a book about creative process and things like imposter syndrome and how we overcome the resistance to sitting down and making work happen. The two of you make a lot of work happen. Rosie, how?
Yeah, great question. This is what happens when you don't know how to sit still and you have really big ambitions and you want to make change in the world, but you don't know how to do it in just one thing. I've had several people in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I actually had someone yesterday call me out and be like, what's your one thing? You do so much. Like, why are you doing all these different things? And I think my creativity has just always been there, which is funny though, because I've never called myself a creative person until maybe this year, realizing that I make TikToks and a podcast and LinkedIn. It's like I am a content creator at the end of the day. But I don't really have a very good process. I have a strategy in terms of the sense of writing things in a certain way, using storytelling, content pillars, and having a structure to it. And even, I don't like saying hacking the algorithm, but having an understanding of the algorithm. But I don't know. I love writing. I love documenting. I love sharing. I love expressing through content. For me, it's just such a a deep passion. So I don't see it as work. I don't see it as I have to fill a quota of a certain number of posts. To me, it's like, oh, this is enjoyment. This is fun. If I get to monetize that one day, or through brand deals, or through clients one day, amazing. But for me, it's just like, this is fun. And I had a blog for a couple of years because I just wanted to express somewhere and have autonomy over something in a space where I could call my own. That's why I started the podcast. I wanted something of my own, and I wasn't ready to run a business. And for me, these are just, it's almost therapy in a little bit of a way. It's for me a way to express, because I don't journal, I don't meditate personally, but content is sort of my outlet in a bit of a way. It's the way that I can have fun and relax. Sure, there are days where it's exhausting and I'm like 2 weeks behind in responding to comments and editing TikTok videos. But for me, it's therapy. Like, I love filming an outfit of the day on TikTok. I love commenting on other people's LinkedIns. I find it enjoyment, a form of enjoyment. And yeah, I guess therapy in a way. So I don't really know where my creativity comes from. It comes from anywhere and everywhere, which is a terrible answer, but it's honest.
No, I think that's an excellent answer. And I've been this week in my posts unpacking the idea of, if you want to make a lot of stuff, the real trick is just to develop the muscle where you see the world through a lens of being somebody
Every
who,
moment is a content opportunity. And I had someone tell me once, don't see it as, oh, I have to make this. It's just, anything can be documented. I see myself as almost like a filmmaker. Just anything in life can be beautiful and inspiring, and that can come from anywhere. And that person that told me that, I can't remember who it was, but that clicked in my head. And now I see it as fun and fulfilling and enjoyment. I'm like, oh, I could make a fun video out of this. I don't see it as, it's a chore, I have to post. And it's really helped change my relationship with content and creativity.
how you mentioned not feeling like you were a creative person as of a year ago. What were you before you were a creative person? How'd you see yourself?
I have no idea. Never thought of myself as a leader, never thought of myself as creative. I never labeled myself as creative because I was like, I can't paint. Yet I did dancing, and I was a theater kid for a really long time. And I've I had a blog for 5 years. I've had Instagram for however long Instagram's been around for. So before that, I don't think I even had a label for myself, because I doubted myself so much. I struggled with such deep anxiety about it, and this internalized systemic sort of pressure of growing up Asian, and this pressure of I'm a failure because I didn't get an A on my math test, or I didn't pursue medicine. And so I was kind of just like, oh, I'm a corporate girl. And that was my label, was I was a corporate millennial, I suppose. And that's how I saw it, that I wanted to climb the ladder, and that would be successful, and that would impress my parents. It would mean I've made it, gold star for me. But yeah, I thought, I don't know, I didn't think I was worthy of the title of being creative in a weird way. This is really unlocking a lot of stuff right now.
Well, that's where we're going. Yeah, let's
getting deep, getting real deep.
But you see yourself as creative now.
Definitely.
Well,
and it feels freeing to say that in a weird way.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's such a powerful idea, is to be creative, is to take things from the ether and turn them into impact in the world.
Yeah.
Through the stuff we make. It's super powerful. One thing I'm interested in with the two of you is, and I think this goes for so many people on LinkedIn, the opportunities we've taken advantage of through making stuff. Theoretically, like, we're not special, right? We're not unique. Anybody had the opportunity to step into kind of what you're doing, Rosie, or even Taz, somebody could have jumped on being LinkedIn's Robin Hood, right? And like taken that approach. But they didn't. And there's such power in that we just see the opportunities and step into them, that there is that. And LinkedIn isn't the only platform where that's available. And TikTok has been cool like that for you as well, Rosie. But Taz, I think you've got thoughts over there.
So, thoughts on what makes me a creative, or what's my creative process?
I am interested in how you think about creativity, and maybe I'll put that, I'll merge that with a question about your branding, which is to say, like, where are you going?
So in terms of creativity, I think of it as just rearranging things, because you don't really ever create anything. You can just rearrange stuff. And that's true at a very minuscule physical level. You're never going to be able to create or destroy energy or any of that, like, without getting too deep on anyone. But
We're getting existential.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah. But content's the same, because you're not going to be creating something that doesn't or cannot or hasn't ever existed. Sure, you can rearrange things in a way where they're presented in a different format. So what I try to do is I try to understand the most efficient ways to rearrange them, the most efficient ways to present them. And, and by efficient, I mean, my metric at the moment is what resonates with people. So my process of creativity is, it's very boring and scientific, in the sense that I look at it as, okay, this is what I know about humans. This is what can induce the highest dopaminergic response based on XYZ pillars that I have, obviously, because you need to operate within some sort of rules. And so I try to create something that induces most of that response. That's why, so I do focus a lot on engagement and stuff. People say, engagement is not what matters and everything. I believe the opposite of that. I do think that engagement is very important if you want to have a higher reach. And right now, LinkedIn is the only platform that works in reverse compared to every other platform. On other platforms, what you do is you go get attention shamelessly, and then you monetize it. The monetization comes afterwards. And what that means is that you can be a creator. So for example, Mr. Beast, he figured out the ways to induce that dopaminergic response at the maximum level. And then once he had a substantial, obviously a huge amount of attention, you can literally do whatever you want in terms of monetization. So you can sell chocolates, burgers, clothes, anything. So I think that LinkedIn is a bit behind in terms of that entire process. And people are too busy trying to remain in a smaller pocket and saying, look, I don't want mass attention, because it's not a content creator platform. What I do want is my niche specific attention, and then I'm going to sacrifice my life to try and convert them. So I believe the opposite of that. I say, look, that's not sure. Doesn't mean that doesn't work. It does work, but the strategy that I'm trying to use is one where no one is worried about mass attention, and they go, okay, I'm just trying to do niche attention. I don't want to do mass attention, and then try to get that and not worry about monetization at the moment. So that's the creative process. But when I'm trying to create content, what I try to do is I have some rules and some pillars of how I want to represent myself, because at the end of the day, I believe every medium is just a method to represent yourself. That's why it was interesting when I was listening to Rosie before, and she said, she's different on Instagram in terms of it's a slightly different persona. And so I covered this in the course as well, because the number one problem that people have when they jump on LinkedIn is that they believe that they can be themselves completely as they are with their wives or kids or in real life. And then when they fail to do that, because it's not possible, because the only medium where that's possible is reality. When they fail to do that, they get really apprehensive about content creation and creativity, because they're like, oh, I'm going to misrepresent myself. So I think that you need to understand that you cannot represent yourself completely. And then in terms of creativity, my process at the moment is to try to get mass attention. And so I don't really worry about niches and all of that stuff. But what I worry about is how is the person going to resonate with this piece of content. And so I think of wide audiences. Basically, I want to, when you read the post, I want you to get a dopaminergic response in your brain where you're like, oh, okay, I like this guy. Like that's that's what I try doing in calculated way.
That's really interesting. And there is this tendency that if you're a creator talking about selling or talking about how we create compelling stuff, the advice, the tips, the tricks, the processes tend to come out as like, this is the right way to do it, in a way that suggests that other ways are wrong. You know, that like niche is inherently better than going for, humans. And one thing I go back to all the time is just that there are 800 million people on the platform, and theoretically we have 800 million different ways and reasons for leveraging it if we wanted to. But that's really interesting. The thinking about how do you appeal to as many people as you possibly can is, I think you're right that there are very few people. I'm trying to think of people who seem to approach the game that way.
When you find them, let me know.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask both of you, let's touch on your course, Taz, a little bit. So one of the questions I got from more than one person was the free question. And I'll tell you, I've started bopping around. I spent a half hour with the course last night. It just dropped. Wait, what day? 2 days ago? 3 days ago?
I think 5 days now. Yeah, 6 days now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I
know. Time flies.
It really does. So I listened to your explanation of why it was free, and I got to tell you, I'm not quite satisfied. So Taz, if you're willing, I'd love to hear you unpack the thought process on and I'll tell you, like, what I've watched so far, it is like, it's excellent. So like the production quality is good, like the amount of meat in the thing, it is a very meaty course. And it's something that if you do this thing, you're going to get much better at this game. That's no doubt about that. And your answer in the intro of the course as to why it was free was because I just want to build trust. I mean, that's how I took it. It's like, well, yeah, that's what everybody wants to do though, right? So really, what are you doing, man?
So I could probably talk for a very long time about why it's free, but the main reason is that I thrive when I go against the grain. And so what I figured out the grain is that there's a market right now where there's a giant market that you can access if you want to sell a course and monetize that in XYZ ways. Mm-hmm. So for example, Justin Welsh sold 7,000 or 6,500 of his content OS copies in 2.5 years. Yeah, exactly. It's insane. So there is that entire market. However, that entire market has a shadow community, which is, I wouldn't really call it a shadow community. Everyone that buys a course also has in their intuition. So there's the rationale that I should buy a course, and then there's the intuition that says, look, I'm going to get scammed. And so, and so that's something that I saw no one was cashing in on, in terms of, again, how are you going to cash in on that if you don't charge anyone any money? You will have to watch to find out soon.
Well,
but
okay.
So there is I'll just right off the bat say that none of this is charity work. I'm not a charity worker, and I don't spend my time in things that I don't believe I'll get an ROI on. I'm not a saint. I'm not a priest. I'm not, any of those people. Obviously, everything that I'm doing has a strategy associated with it. Otherwise, I would not be able to actually put the effort in and do it. So the strategy here is that, and I did share a part of it, which is to build trust at scale. and that's one part. It's not there's obviously elements to it afterwards where, okay, so then what do you do with that trust, and then how do you monetize that trust? And it's a bit different than just maybe building an email chain, like email list, because that's not innovative or new at all. But I did in 4 days, in 5 days now, get 4,000 warm leads, because these are all people that are interested in learning about LinkedIn. So for me, these are warm leads. That in itself is very, very pricey for me. Then on top of that, I think I would have maybe got 100 people that shouted me out because of that. That again, including Rosie, and she was so kind to do it. She did an amazing post on it. It just blew my mind. And that is something that if you actually go out and try to pay people to do it, it would cost a lot of money. And so you can do it without spending that money by doing things that can help other people. So the plan to it is going to take a lot more than the 5 minutes that we've got left, but there is obviously a strategy attached to it. And it's just blown my mind, because Justin Walsh, the biggest creator, has about 6,500 people that learned from him in 2.5 years. And I'm at 4,000 in 5 days. So in 2.5 years, I'm going to make sure that he's not selling any more courses. Sorry, Justin. But yeah.
You're coming for him.
Now, this is just a joke, because again, the market's big enough. But this is how I market mine, because anyone that has that intuition just a tad bit louder than their rationale to go buy the course then comes to me. So this is just another way of capturing the audience that's interested but not quite there. So it's sort of like stealing leads out of someone else's pipeline, because I'm just undercutting them on price. And then what I decide to do with the lead later is different. But at the end of the day, so I figured out that over time, if I graph it out, the only way I can steal or capture more leads in this limited market is I have to undercut on price, because I don't have that attention and all of that. So it's just it's simple math.
No, all that makes sense to me. And I hear that you got somewhere you're going with this. You say, what are you doing to make your living right now? What, like,
oh, yeah. So I do 3 things. I do content creation. I have 4 people that I've had that work with me in corporate that I'm doing this for in the security industry. So I'm looking at changing that into an agency format so I can scale it, because at the moment I can't. Yeah. So that's one. Then another thing I do is I have about 2 different types of content consultations that you can do. So you can do a strategy session with me, or you can do an audit with me. That's 90 minutes. So I'm a very humble person. I don't need a lot of money. I do 2 or 3 of these and I'm happy, like I'm balling. So that's basically what I do.
Cool. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of time. I'll throw a curveball at you both. Who's one person you think that every person on LinkedIn would benefit from connecting with or following?
So Susan David, I think she's someone that if you follow, she will literally make your life better. It has nothing to do with anything that I talk about, but she's basically a Harvard educated PhD doctor and talks about mental health.
I'm gonna have to connect with her. The person I'm thinking of is Megan Liu. Liu.
Okay.
She is a data scientist and just hit 50K followers, which I just saw her post there, so I remember that. But yeah, she's just like, I think I really like her because she's a powerhouse Asian female in an industry that is often dominated by males. And as a fellow Asian female on a platform that is dominated by males, it's cool to see her succeeding, and she's just quite fun. And similar to what you were saying, Taz, I think she would make your life better.
It's 10 p.m. here with us. I'm not saying because I have a time curfew, that's fine. I actually really enjoyed this conversation, but that's probably why we're both tripping a bit.
Yeah.
Like
this is the 5th podcast I've recorded this week. I'm a bit tired.
Oh my goodness. You all batch yours? or have you been bopping around to other people's podcasts this week?
A little bit of both. I had one on Monday, I had two of my own on Tuesday, a different one on Tuesday as a guest. I had one before this evening, and I had an in-person talk yesterday.
Yeah, how did that
just
go?
Busy week. Oh, it was amazing. It was a dream come true. Like this sounds weird because most people would find it being like scary being on stage. I felt very at home. It felt very right. So excited to pursue whatever that goes down because I'm not doing enough already. So yeah, add keynote speaker to the list of things I do.
That was so cool. And just for people, I saw your post about it. What was the event?
So it was an event run by the Victorian a part of Victorian government called Study Melbourne, and they were partnering with Intern Match, which is a company that focuses on hooking up international students with jobs, internships, mentors. And it was the launch event for a series called Career Catalyst. So essentially, I was talking to a room full of international students about the importance of personal branding and how they can stand out to get a job, get an internship, and find confidence to use, I guess, LinkedIn or social media to help them, accelerate and, stand above everyone else so that they can really succeed.
Excellent. You're both really inspiring people, and I really appreciate watching what you're doing over there. And with so many people, there's this feeling that we're just getting warmed up. And that is most definitely the case for the two of you. So obviously in the show notes, I'll be including your profile links. Taz, I will be linking to the course, of course. Rosie, I will link to your pod.
Thank you.
It's a definite maybe. And
that's the one.
Wait, the link or the pod?
Is there anywhere else you want to direct people to learn more about you or what you do?
I mean, if anyone's on TikTok, you can follow me there, but it's definitely like outfit of the days and fashion. And it's not going to be inspiring how to start a business kind of content, but always fun. We love it.
Rosie, should I be leaning into TikTok? Do I need to? Would it make my life better?
Only if you feel like you enjoy it, you feel like you can have consistency to begin with the content and upload schedule, then yes. But if you feel like you don't have the time, I don't think it's worth it. TikTok, when you start out, in my opinion, you have to go hard and you have to do it consistently to really start that momentum and gain awareness, following, build a community. I mean, it's like that with any platform, but I think TikTok is quite aggressive in that sense. So if you have the spare time, go for it. I love it personally. I think there's a community for everything. That's what's very special about TikTok, is there's a lot of different spaces that people obsess over and support and want to be part of those communities. But if you don't have the time for it, I would just knuckle down on what you're doing currently and just go hard on that.
All right.
Boys do great on TikTok, man. I'm telling you.
I love it.
Yeah. Big money too.
You think I need to be doing that?
Oh, no. I'm just saying, lawyers, but I don't really know what you should be doing, but yes, do it.
Well, that's
Book an
actually
audit
all
with Taz.
Yeah, that's all this podcast is just me getting free advice from people, about what I should
I'll
be
wait
doing
for my
with my
paycheck
life.
in the mail. Thanks.
Well, you got to send the invoice first, but of course. Thank you both for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having us. Yeah. Thank
So
you.
fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the conversation. It did feel like we were just getting warmed up. We turned off the recording and rolled for another 10 minutes in a way that said, son of a bitch, that was the best 10 minutes of the entire thing. And I've said this, when I started the podcast, my intention was that these were going to be 35-minute episodes, and that got blown out of the water immediately. And now I'm finding an hour. I don't think an hour is enough for kind of what I'm interested in unpacking and getting after. So I'm wondering whether we're going to experiment and gravitate toward even longer form stuff as we go along here. Only time will tell. Again, thank you for listening. I would so appreciate if you could leave a rating and review on Apple or wherever you get podcasts. Although we need to expand more. So you can only find this on Anchor, Apple, and Spotify. I've seen a request for Stitcher. We're going to make that happen. We're going to keep spreading. But 10 episodes in the book. I think we probably got another 10 in this. Till next time, see you out there in LinkyLand.